Hey guys, Justin here with JHart Modelworks, and in this installment on the Gordon Murray Automotive T50 by Tamiya, we are going to wrap up the front end, which we started in the last video, and then we're going to move on and knock out the engine. So there's quite a bit to do. Let's go ahead and get this camera flipped around and get to work. There's not a lot of prep in this section, but other than cutting the parts off the sprue and cleaning up the nub marks, doing a bit of sanding, we do want to pre-assemble a few pieces, starting with the lower half of the air intake and throttle bodies. We also want to glue together the two halves of the engine and transmission. Now the top of the engine is keyed. There's a little nub here, and you need to make sure that that lines up with the locating points on the top of the side of the engine. Add in our Tamiya Extra Thin, and then make sure everything settles down into place properly. Now you could go through and try to fill and sand all of the seams all the way around the engine block. Really don't. Just don't. When the engine is fully assembled and the car is assembled around it, absolutely none of these seams can be seen. Save yourself the time and effort. Where you do want to put that effort in is these next four parts, which are the exhaust housings, which are kind of a shame because the actual engine exhausts are works of art. Now I get it, it's a $4.5 million supercar with a naturally aspirated V12 engine producing a lot of heat, and that needs to get vented outside the engine bay. But I mean, look at those exhausts. The exhausts are wrapped in a heat wrapping, and you may see the housings are open at the bottom. Fresh air is pulled in from the bottom, and the hot air surrounding the exhausts is pulled up and out through the four weird fin vent things on the top, and it's vented outside the car. As far as building the model goes, we're going to assemble the two halves of each side of the exhausts with some Tamiya Extra Thin, and then once everything is dry, we'll sand all the upper seams smooth. The instructions say to paint this part in semi-gloss black. In reality, this part should be made of forged, or what Gordon Murray calls recycled carbon, which actually looks more like this. I've been looking for forged carbon decals for over a year now. Hobby Design used to make some, but they're impossible to find. I think they're out of production. Zoom-On makes some, which I bought, only to find that the pattern is very unrealistic, and the $10 sheet was the size of a credit card. I approached Snail Motorsport, and they have been saying we're going to release it very soon for well over a year now. So I'm tired of waiting, and I'm going to try to make this using paint. We have started by priming the part in Mr. Surfacer 1500 Black. To make the pattern, we're going to be using some Tamiya acrylics, starting with some sky gray. We're also going to be using some chrome silver. We've got some dark iron, which is a dark gray. And you can't read this one, but this is gunmetal. We've also got some flat black. This is really more just to touch up some mistakes. The last thing we need is an old raggedy paintbrush. This is one of those cheap, nasty tester's brushes with the synthetic plastic bristles from when I first started years ago. I've cut the bristles down to about 1/4 inch. This is going to be perfect. The raggedy the brush, the better. Do not use an expensive brush for this. Starting with the sky gray, we want to get some paint on the brush, and then we're going to dab a lot of it back off onto a paper towel. Then we'll just lightly stab some splotches onto the part. We don't want to completely cover the part, we just need a few splotches here or there. The big empty spaces are fine right now. That one splotch is a bit heavy, so we're going to go ahead and fix that. Between every color, we're going to clean our brush out really well with some lacquer thinner. We don't want to contaminate our paints. Now we're going to take some of the flat black and we're just going to stab in just a little bit of splotch right in the middle to break up that big gray spot. Next up, we're going with chrome silver and we're going to repeat the process, tapping in a few splotches of silver here and there. We want to randomly place these in some of the empty black spaces, and some can overlap the sky gray as well. If you wanted a bright, high contrast look, you could probably stop here maybe, but I want more variety, so we're going to go with more colors, and our next color is going to be the dark iron gray. Just tap that in and knock the piece completely off the stick. I do that a lot. Just stab it in randomly here and there. Definitely want to overlap some of that bright silver, overlap some of the gray, just completely random stabs. And we're going to do the same thing now with the gunmetal. This is going to be a dark metallic color. So where the dark iron gray was kind of a counterpart to the light sky gray, this is going to be a counterpart to that chrome silver. So I decided for a little more variety that I wanted to go ahead and layer in a little bit more of the chrome silver and the dark iron, as well as some more of the sky gray. So we just added one or two little splotches here or there of each, just to help break it up a little bit more. This is the end result of the brush painting. Again, if you wanted a high contrast, bright look, you could stop right here. But I'm going for a toned down look, so we're off to the spray booth with some Tamiya LP5 semi-gloss black. We're not going to pull way back, we just want to pull back a tiny bit. So when we spray, we don't want to do this and cover everything. We want to lay down an extremely light, thin coat of black to gently tone down the brighter grays. So just like this, we want to put down a feather light, even coat all over the part. So that's where we're at with it. We didn't spray enough to cover everything, we just sprayed just enough to tone down the brighter colors and even it out a little. Now this is a little bit too glossy for me, so I'm going to hit this part with a coat or two of Mr. Hobby GX113 Flat Clear. And this is our end result. I think that coat of black really helps to balance it out. They do a gloss version of this carbon, so you could have used a GX100 or 112 high gloss clear instead. I used the flat because I was going for a dry carbon look. Before we begin assembly, we're going to lay down some decals, starting with the brakes. We're going to use the larger ones for the front brakes, as typically the larger brakes go to the front of the car. On the calipers, we have these holes for mounting to the upright. These go to the back. So this side over here is where we want to apply the decal. We'll cut our decals off the sheet and dip one of them in some warm water for a few seconds. We'll also apply some microset to the flat surface of the caliper. Then we'll carefully apply the decal using a cotton bud. We can then absorb any excess moisture and nudge the decal into its final position. And we'll repeat that for the caliper on the other side. On the front of the engine, there's a small Gordon Murray Automotive logo. We want to make sure when we put it down that it faces the right way up. For the valve covers, Tamiya gives us these metal transfers for the Cosworth V12 lettering. We want to cut through the clear top layer, but be careful not to cut the transfer itself, so cut wide and leave plenty of room around the logo. Now we want to peel the clear layer from the white backing. The transfer should come up with the clear layer. We're going to set the transfer in place. Try to get it as straight as you can. You don't really get a good chance to move it around. Once you have it in place, rub over just the metal part to set it, and I like to give it about a good 5 minutes to set before I lift the clear layer off. We want to apply one of these to both of the valve covers, and be careful when handling because the metal transfers can sometimes get knocked off. Once the decals are dry, we're going to start assembling, but before we do, there's a couple of things I want to point out. Number one, you may have noticed there are more of these pulls on the front seats. Tamiya gives us decals for these again, and I thought they were just decorative stripes that I didn't want to mess with. But looking at some reference photos of the interior, I saw these are actually pulls like on the storage compartments. Maybe the seats lift for storage or access or something, I don't know, but I went ahead and added them in. Number two, you'll notice one of the springs is already on. My advice, do not test fit the springs before you paint them, which I didn't do. And once you get them on, don't try to take them off, which I did. The springs are incredibly fragile, and I broke one trying to get it off. So I positioned the spring so the brake is on the bottom towards the back where it isn't visible, so that's why one is already on. We're using some CA glue and the mechanical pencil method again. This has really been working out for me, so I'm going to continue on with it here, as there are some really tight spaces we need to get into. Continuing from the side, we've already got the spring on. We'll add a little bit of CA glue to this tiny hole in the back section of this silver area, as well as to the inside of the shock. I'm also going to add some to the outer shock mounts locating nubs. And then we'll insert the outer shock into its position, making sure we get it pressed all the way home. Once that's in place, we'll add a drop to the mounting hole in the lower control arm. We'll gently pull the control arm down just enough to slide the end of this black shock arm into the hole so that it sits just like that. Okay, so you probably can't see it here, but there's another tiny hole in the silver bit right here, and a large square area back in the back with another hole. These are the mount points for the upper control arm. When installing this, you want to make sure that this detailed side is up and the smooth side faces down. We'll line the pins up to the holes and then press it home. Now we're going to add our brakes to the uprights. We want to be sure to get the right caliper on the right upright. There is a section that is notched more on one side than the other, and that notch goes to the top. We're going to add a little bit of CA glue to the holes and then slide the posts into place. I really like how Tamiya did these so that the calipers glue to the upright like a real car instead of gluing onto the rotor. That looks really cool. And if you are into the whole rolling wheels thing, the brake rotors will actually spin with the wheels free of the caliper. Before we mount the upright to the control arms, we want to add our poly cap into this hole. Make sure to use the large poly caps for this, not the small ones. Also make sure that you get out of frame when you do it. We then want to very carefully sand the paint off the ring surface around the poly cap, and then we're going to use some Tamiya Extra Thin to glue one of these small round covers, part number 12, into place over the poly cap. We're using the Tamiya Extra Thin instead of CA glue, as Tamiya Extra Thin doesn't affect the poly caps because they're made of Teflon and not styrene. Now there's a little pin here on the bottom of the control arm. Make sure that we do not break these off. This pin goes into the hole in the bottom of the upright, and then the top of the upright just clicks into place. Moving on to the left-hand side of the car, we're going to add the spring. It'll slide on a little bit of the way, and then I had trouble getting it to go the rest of the way down. Maybe I didn't get something cleaned up all the way when I prepped this part in the last video, I'm not sure, but with a little bit of effort, be very careful not to break the spring, it will go into place. For the rest of this side, just repeat the process that we did on the left. We'll install the other side of the shocks. Then we'll get the upper control arm installed. We'll then assemble our brakes and our uprights. And finally, we'll mount the upright into the right-hand side of the suspension. Now we want to carefully press the steering linkage onto the posts of the uprights. Make sure not to break the arm or break the C-clips. I have done it so many times. And once done, we have our articulating steering. Now we're going to apply some Tamiya Extra Thin to the mount points and along the top edge on this side. And you can see here how these side panels just slot into place like a puzzle piece. Test fit these cooling pipes first. I did not and tried to glue the bottom end into the radiator mount points the first time I tried it, as the radiator mount is right in front of the correct lower mount point. This is kind of a pain in the ass too. The mount holes are very shallow indents, they aren't actual holes. And the top of the pipe should wrap around the top edge of the side piece. The other side works the same way. The tubing for this side though is shaped completely different and the top end points up. There is a mount point on each side right in front of the pipes, and these are for the radiators. These mount holes, again, are very shallow, but the little nubs on the inside of the radiators should fit in, and then the top should rest against the tops of the pipes. All in all, the fit for everything is really quite good. It's just a little complicated until you figure out how it should go. The last part of the front end is the gear shift. Originally, I felt this should have been a part of the initial interior install, but having built more of the kit, I understand why they held off. This part is very exposed and very easy to hit and break off. I've actually knocked it off twice since installing it. And now onto the engine, and I cannot stress enough, test fit everything before you assemble. Everything should go together very well. It's a great kit, but there are a few places where the instructions can be kind of vague. The parts fit perfectly, once you know how they fit. The first part of the engine assembly is the front cover, and interestingly enough, there is no timing belt or chain. This V12 revs to 12,000 RPM, so for reliability, the timing mechanism is actually a series of interconnecting gears housed inside the engine like a beautiful Swiss watch. The cam covers are a little annoying. It's hard to tell which way is up on the parts, and for some reason, even using CA glue, they did not want to stay on for me. I had to glue them on twice to get them to go on right and to hold in place. Once you do get the rear cam cover assembled, add a little glue to the bottom as well as to the back of the block, and it just slots neatly into place. The valve covers on this kit are pretty cool. Tamiya designed the coil packs to be a separate part, making it much easier to paint them black and slot them into place inside the valve cover. Make sure they are pressed all the way in though. Once you have the valve cover assembled, add a little bit of glue to the top of the block and press the valve cover in place. You do have to watch them though. If the coil packs aren't in all the way, they may not want to seat properly. Okay, this is one of those parts where the instructions are vague. The kit instructions show this part connects to the end of the triangle engine mounts, and then it looks like it comes up to the top of the engine block. This one on this side looks like it goes straight upright too. They are not. These rod parts connect to the middle of the block here, and then they go to the end of the triangular mounts. We'll add a little bit of glue to the mount end and add some to this small hole in the side of the block. Then we'll take the rectangular end and connect it to the block, then set the round end in place on the engine mount. We need to repeat those steps for the other side of the engine, starting with assembling the valve covers. And then we'll add in the other engine mount support bar. The bottom of the transmission really only fits one way. You could maybe possibly force it in backwards, but it should go in with very little effort so long as you tilt the back end first. There are 3 mounting holes on the engine bay panel. We'll add a little CA glue to all 3 of them. And once you locate the front 2 points, the third one just clicks into place. From here, we're going to build up the air ducting and the chassis pan. We'll drop a little glue on the locating point in the back and then along this front edge. We'll also put a tiny bit around this tab here, which points towards the front of the car. And then with quite a bit of fiddling, we'll get the part to drop into place. Now that we've got one in, we'll clean the glue off our fingers and repeat for the other side. We have 2 more parts to glue on for these air ducts. We need to add some CA glue here and on the bottom of the inside of the duct, as that is least likely to be seen if we end up making a mess. Then we will wiggle the corner under the engine mount and slot the duct into place. These dropped in surprisingly easier than I expected. Before we can add the top of the transmission and the upper control arms, we need to assemble them. Starting with these arm pieces, which glue to the underside on these 2 mount points. We then have this other part, which I honestly have no idea what this part is, but there is a square mounting point on the transmission top, as well as a square hole in the bottom of this part. Double check the manual and make sure you have this part in the right way. It will go on wrong, and I almost put it on wrong. Once assembled, we'll add a little glue to the sides, and with a little bit of effort, it will eventually just click down into place. This black part here connects up to the air ducts on the sides that we assembled earlier and feeds fresh air through another radiator and a gold heatsink, and then back towards the fan at the back of the car. Just add a little glue on the hole here and a little more on the pin, and it fits into place as well. You could probably glue it to the ends of the vents as well, but I didn't see the need. With that in place, we'll add a little glue to the 3 mount points for the radiator and drop it into place. And now there are 3 more mount points on the top of the radiator where we will place the heatsink. My pencil head broke on me there. It's pretty rare for that to happen, but it is something to watch out for. That gold heatsink just drops into place right here, and thankfully it covers up the mess from where the pencil head broke and got glue on it. We have another set of suspension arms to place. There is a large locating pin on this one, and it is D-shaped, so it will only go into the hole in one direction. Carefully slide the arms around the engine, careful not to break them, and then drop the pin into the hole. Next, we're going to add in the exhausts. We're switching to the glue applicator tip as the holes are much larger here. We want to add a little glue to the end of the exhaust pipe as well as to the sides of the engine. Then we'll line up the end of the exhaust on the pipe, and then the sides will drop into place on the block. And last but not least, we have that engine air intake that we painted up in the forged carbon that feeds in later from the roof. We'll just glue the throttle bodies into the intake. There's a small hole that lines up with a pin inside the intake, and then we'll add a little glue to the 4 mount holes on the bottom and then drop it into place atop the block. The mount pins are awfully small, so make sure we get all 4 of them down into place. And that, my friends, is going to be a wrap for this part of the build. In the next T50 video, we're going to wrap up the rear suspension as well as finish off the interior. And then after that video, it looks like we started up on the body assembly and the final assembly. But that looks like it's probably going to be at least a couple more videos on their own, as this body is incredibly complex. There are some really cool features to it that I'm really looking forward to, but it's intense. But before all that, next week we're taking a look at the final results for the Tester's Lamborghini Silhouette, so be sure to check that out. As always, guys, thanks for hanging out and building with me. I always appreciate you. Any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the comments section below, and I will catch you on the next one.